there's peak 65, but what about peak RMD age? That's going to be happening. And a lot of people are going to have additional income that they have to take. Where are they going to put that money?
Welcome into Impactful Conversations, stories and lessons for financial advisors. I'm your host, Dave Edgecombe. Joining me, we got a friend of the podcast. We got Tom Haines joining us. He is the head of capital markets and index solutions with Annexus. Before we started rolling, I asked you if you were a history buff for a reason. I want you to kind of take us back and run us through sort of the starting point for an annuity. And not necessarily worry about how we got here, but let's focus on sort of that starting point for an annuity.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me back.
Of course.
Let me geek out in this one. The annuity structure, that's going back from the time of the Romans, right? Mm-hmm. You had tontines, and you read about that. You can look that up on yourself, where people are killing each other to have whatever pool of money's left. But in all honesty, I think coming out of World War II, you began to see more what we call variable annuities, and many of those suffered during the financial crisis. And it was in 1995 that actually it's a firm that Annexus partners with still to this day, Genesis Financial. They invented the index annuity. They did with a few insurers at that time, and that was really an opening to further the development of retirement planning. There was fixed annuities, but what the Genesis team said is how could they bring in an element of providing some upside on the market with downside protection? Well, if we think about markets going up, which we talked about in our last meeting, how do you get access to that, but an element to the adage, adjusting your sleeping point?
Yeah.
And that's what they were able to brought to do. And that really furthered now. So we're going into 30 years of this. And what you've seen is a real legitimization and an expansion. And I would say an expansion in a good way. The efficiency of the product has allowed for firms like Nationwide to provide a guaranteed income rider, which is important. The risk of running out of money. What about the ability to afford for some sort of legacy plan? Or if you need some sort of care, additional monies for that. And that's where this is expanded. The vision really also is the legitimacy of it. When Ron Schertz, co-founder of Annexus, and his business partner saw the opportunity to enter into developing Annexus to really build a product to further index annuities, they decided to do it with a legitimization. Instead of going to B- rated carriers and just sell freely, they went in there with an organized process. How to think about working with A-rated companies. Ratings matter. Mm-hmm. How to work with a way that you're educating the marketing force. The marketers at Impact Partnership, for example, the training that go through, the education, how to make sure the marketing materials. So we've seen this now play out, and that vision is one of the reasons now I'm proud to say that last year, the year prior, index annuity sales are outpacing variable annuity sales. Just a more efficient wrapper, and it allows it now to be just part of the portfolio. It's recognized as an asset class, not just a standalone widget.
Are you surprised by how annuity sales have kind of grown especially over the last 3 years, I want to say? Are you surprised by it, or what do you make of that?
Well, there's two things I think that are really pertinent. Number one is peak 65. Yeah. Right? The baby boomer. It was really just the last year or two that you've seen that peak 65. So how are we planning for retirement? Some studies show you can be all in equities, but going back, is that realistic with a sequence of return risk? The idea that all of a sudden you have an awful bear market in the beginning of your retirement, or going back to the adage, adjusting to your sleeping point. So that product allows for a portfolio completion, and that's been recognized. The other part is now that index annuities are 30 years old, it's been a growing industry, and products written 10 years ago, 12 years ago, what tends to happen if you're purchasing the product, you might have purchased it in a very low interest rate environment. Mm-hmm. And because of that, the insurance companies, even the good insurance companies, well-rated, they could only offer the product to be so competitive. And what I mean by competitive, maybe based on the payout, lifetime income payout ratio, or the participation rate, the upside to the index. Those rates were lower when we had lower interest rates during quantitative easing. Now that rates have gone up, there's a better opportunity. And we call it the great retirement refinance. Just like in COVID, you might have had a mask on, but you might have set a table in front of your house to refinance your house. Mm-hmm. Or there was a lot of real estate transactions done virtually. Well, now with rates really high, you don't see as much mortgage and real estate transactions as we talked about in our last meetup. However, now that's an opportunity to refinance products that were purchased years ago in a lower rate environment. And some of those products actually have what we call surrender period, be it 10 years, 12 years. They're coming up for renewal. So you're seeing that type of rebalancing as well, which is very healthy. It's not predatory if done the right way, and it's cognizant of the major shift we've had in the interest rate market movement.
I've had an advisor say to me, and he harped on this, that with how retirement has changed is people aren't planning to live in retirement for 30 years. That's sort of the reality now with when people are retiring and how long the life expectancy is, in that framework has changed, and the way that you prepare for it needs to change. So how do you assess how retirement has changed and what an annuity can do for you from that perspective?
It helps in the preparation side of how do you now manage the rest of your portfolio to de-risk. The thought that many asset managers say, well, we're just going to de-risk the bonds, that's not going to necessarily be enough. How are you going to have a safe withdrawal rate that is really realistic to live a comfortable lifestyle in the United States, to go on trips, to plan for Medicare, to pay for Medicare? Those are considerations that have to play out. So bringing in something that perhaps gives income, it gives an element of downside protection. Not, statistically, we don't see bonds going down as much as equities. Well, we just had the worst bond market in U.S. history. So the ability to have full downside protection is comforting while providing things that can help you really plan for a long life. To your point, 30, 35 years. So that has really been one of the I think, abilities that the index annuity and retirement planning process, that self-pension, that personal pension plan brings.
Is there one thing that you can put your finger on that says this is probably the most dynamic way that an annuity has evolved in the time that you've been doing this?
What we're seeing is it's beyond just the S&P 500. Mm-hmm. Now, the S&P 500 is the leading U.S. benchmark, but 30 years ago, that's all they had, was how to allocate to the S&P 500. And a lot of what I do, my role is to work with, especially the academic partners we have, some of the leading asset managers, in bringing different indices into the product. Now, why does that matter? We've had a really good bull market. Frankly, the S&P strategy could outperform the other strategies. A lot of people say to me, well, you're just pinheaded. The other things didn't work. Well, remember the last decade, and not to be doom and gloom, right? There are different markets where not the S&P 500 is always going to be the best market. So if you're going to buy a policy, to your point, for 20, 30 years, right, because you're looking to live longer, 40 years even, you want to have choice in the policy. And that choice maybe is even diversification, that we're not having bets. So we've been able to see that prowess. The other thing is I think we have a much more robust offering to think about the other considerations of why you buy the policy, such as maybe you didn't buy long-term care. A lot of people, first of all, long-term care isn't as affordable or available as it once was 20, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. You saw companies like Genworth really have financial problems. So the ability to bring in a policy that maybe gives you some additional liquidity or enhancement there, that's important. I think the furthering of guaranteed income in the policy, those are things that weren't as robust and that have really furthered, which is important. The other part of this is preparation, but what about ongoing maintenance? And okay. I highlighted earlier the idea that you're now 12 years into retirement, you might want to roll your annuity. Well, there's peak 65, but what about peak RMD age? That's going to be happening. And a lot of people are going to have additional income that they have to take. Where are they going to put that money? I look at my own mother. She's 79 years old. She is not spending all of her RMDs. What she's doing, though, is saying, I don't want to put it all in the stock market. I'd rather put some in the index annuity. Now, it's going to be in a non-qualified index annuity, but she's okay with that. It suits her well, and it's able to give her tailored opportunities to get access to some additional care needs, and if she were to have that issue of needing care, some additional payouts there. Maybe it also has some ability for longevity, life needs. So that's where we also think about the bigger picture of the life cycle of retirement, not just the preparation.
So we had Cheryl Moore on the podcast several months ago, and she pointed out, and she works with annuities on a daily basis, and she said one thing that she's seeing is annuities are starting to get really confusing. And for her, she had a hard time parsing through it and understanding it. Are you concerned that in some annuities it can be to the point where they're too confusing that the average financial advisor is unable to explain it to the average retiree?
It's a really good point and question, and I think you have to meet the advisor where they're at. And how do you bring them a policy that ultimately they can understand that is suitable and reputable to help their clients? And what I see is we see a whole span of different types of advisors. And what I'm fortunate of, most of the ones I meet, I know especially the impact partnership advisors, they all have a moral compass to serve their community. Mm-hmm. So that's important. But where's the right level of education that they're receiving to be able to have the right type of product? And that's one of the things we're trying to do, really span that opportunity. So, for example, if you don't want to go through the academic rigor with all of what I'm talking about with our academic partners, it's just too much. We have some solutions built with an S&P design that are really much more clear and straightforward, and that we're really trying to iron out a lot of shenanigans that you might have saw in other strategies years ago. But if you're willing to take that on and you see that and you can analyze it, that's there for you too. So it gives us the choice, and hence why we want to educate. We spend a lot of time now educating our marketing partners on understanding that span of where to help meet where their advisor, where they're at. Because all advisors are here to help our communities.
So I had a fascinating conversation with our advanced resources team here, and one thing they wanted me to ask you was, yes, your clientele isn't the average person. It's the financial advisor that's going to be then, selling the annuity or selling the product. But are you guys concerned with sort of the customer experience of, it's obviously not your customer, but it's down the line, so to speak. So do you guys factor that component in when you're trying to create something that, well, let's make sure that this is actually still working for the person that it's intended for?
Absolutely. And first of all, to start, we are talking about an index annuity, something with 100% downside protection. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about leveraged structures that could lose value. So that's comforting. Right? And then in terms of the educational process, we spend a lot of time at Annexus working through the client-approved marketing materials.
Okay.
So that they are simplified, but in a level of accuracy. The other part that we strive to do is making sure that we have sufficient tools so that the financial professional, the advisor, is able to walk through something with their client. An illustration can be useful because it can teach you how the product is designed, but an illustration isn't going to teach you how it's going to perform unless it's a guaranteed income rider solution. But a lot of times we look at an illustration and you think, oh, it's the last 10 years of performance. Well, that's a regulatory requirement the NAIC imposed years ago. That's the worst thing you can do. So, but we try to do is manage expectations with other materials, other tools to really help our advisors within our group of those IDCs that we work with, such as Impact Partnership, to ensure that we're not mis-selling the product. And at high level, we always try to manage expectations. This is not an equity replacement. So if we go in there, there's 100% downside protection. This is not an equity replacement. We try to show what the income projections are within realistic scenarios. That's a good start. And that's at high level, regardless of the product. Anyone that tells you this is an equity replacement, run away. And just because the back test and illustration shows you as such, that's not the case. That's why we try to use a forecasting approach, a level assumed. We can't control the NIC requirement, but what we're going to do is try to manage working and educating our advisors and our distribution partners to talk about really managing expectations.
You've touched on the academic component a few times and the academic ties that you guys have. I've written down a few names. Stop me if you've heard of them. Bob Schiller, Yale, might have heard of it. Roger Ibbotson, Yale. Jeremy Siegel, Wharton School of Business. Rob Arnott, pioneer of Smart Beta. Now, I want to get into Smart Beta, but we'll save that for a moment. Why is it so important for you guys to partner with the academic community and to have their insight into it?
Well, their research helps to drive the design of the strategy. That doesn't create positive performance every year, but it creates a realization and understanding how the strategy could work and how it doesn't work. The other thing that I value working with academics as opposed to, let's say, some newly minted associate banker at a bank or some expat that has never lived in the United States till now. They might have a perfect, math score in their respective market, have come here and thought about math genius, but if they never studied markets, they don't understand. History doesn't repeat itself, but as Twain says, it rhymes. So when we look at a Schiller, Siegel, Ibiza, or not, they're studying markets not just 10 years, 100 years, 50 years, 200 years in the case of Siegel. They're going to have a better understanding of when their strategy will work and it won't work. So it creates more of a rigor. And that's why we really like working with them. And then part of it is that humility of understanding when it will work and not work. It allows us to understand what will complement it. Because we're not into picking one strategy. That's a bet. That's what the playoffs are coming up to do. That's what, or depending if you're NCAA or NFL playoffs.
Yeah.
But we're not in the betting market. We're trying in financial planning. That's about diversification. So part of that is also the diversification from the S&P 500. You might have the S&P 500. I know it's an overvalued market right now, but how can we then complement it? And that's why we like working with those partners. They're legends, but we're not trying to do brand stacking of legends. They really, it's great, but their design and infrastructure of research just helps us understand navigating markets that are long-term for the retirement cycle, which you point out, Dave, is 30, 35 years.
And growing by the time, and it continues to get longer. I want to switch gears for a moment, because in our previous podcast, we talked AI, and we talked about it from a market standpoint and the AI bubble and what's going to become of the S&P 500 when you've got 7 companies lifting it and all that jazz. Please check that out, like and subscribe to the podcast. But what I want to ask you right now is how you guys at Annexus are using AI and sort of seeing how it can benefit what you guys do on a day-to-day, but also sort of vetting it and sort of seeing what its limitations are and how you've been able to kind of get AI to work for you guys. Because I know that it's a hot button topic for us at Impact, is how can we implement AI more efficiently in what we do here?
Well, that's a really broad question, because AI, I think, is going to impact a lot of parts of business, right?
Yeah, and
I
it
know
can be
that
deceiving.
There's definitely a part how we can make the operational aspects of acquiring an annuity, the contracting, the things that we partner with you at Impact Partnership, but to make that ease of business work, that's definitely the ability to get information. So those are things in gear and working towards, like the rest of the economy. That I know that's occurring. In my world of looking at index solutions and building financial strategies, we do look at AI. A lot of times we're presented AI indices, thinking that they're going to be a different mousetrap to navigate markets. I'm a big believer where AI is going, but I'm going to say this. It doesn't get a pass when I'm presenting an AI index from our diligence process.
Okay.
It has, every time we look at a strategy, and we pass on most at Annexus, these strategies. Yes, we gravitate loving working with academics, but even if it's an academic coming to us, we need to do a diligence process. Just because you have a lot of awards as an academic doesn't mean you're in the deal. You got to demonstrate to us the ability how your strategy can work, as I said. And if I meet a provider of an AI index and I ask to see the model, and they say, well, we're not going to share the model with you, you could use it. You think I'm going to create an AI hedge fund? Call me a doubting Thomas. But what about Bernie Madoff? How do we not know? How do we not know that the number is fictitious? How do we not know that the person is having an erroneous model? That could happen.
Okay.
And there's been stories out there of firms such as F Squared in Boston where they sold an erroneous backtest. What if it's actively managed and we don't know? That creates real investment risks. And the truth is, a lot of times the strategies that go out, they don't actually perform as well. So we need to see the model. Right? Not that I'm going to understand every bit of code, but that's part of our diligence process. Now, AI also can be such a broad term when it comes to financial strategies. Like we recently just launched a strategy with MediaStat, Dr. Ronnie Sack of Boston College. Well, they're utilizing natural language processing to read the news, but the financial modeling of the actual implementation of picking what market to go long or short, that's actually very basic quantitative finance, and nothing too advanced, but it's the prowess of bringing in the news as the advancement.
Yeah.
So we also like to discern what is, really AI, what is a real tool to help us further the development of our financial strategies. Two different things.
Yeah, I think when I talked to our advanced resources team about it, and they wondered aloud how AI would impact their day to day, the overarching theme was there still needs to be a human involved in what they do, because no two retirements are the same, and because there's no such thing as this cookie cutter retirement. So I'm curious, does it really boil down to like human accountability when it comes to, I can type into ChatGPT what my retirement plan should be, but if it gets it wrong, what's the recourse? Whereas what you guys do, you feel like you have this onus of responsibility that no, we need to see them out. No, we need to vet this. No, it needs to go through our rigor process, because there needs to be human accountability, not just a business accountability.
Exactly. And anyone who does AI in any part of business, there has to be still a quality assurance.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where you're going at. So I'm sure we'll see more to come. And I'm actually really welcoming the opportunity to review AI indices that pass that human diligence process.
What's next? When you look in your crystal ball for the next iteration of what a fixed index annuity can be, what do you think it can be? Where's the sky?
Well, what I look at is, where are the needs of retirement? Right? Some people might have, you might have others on the podcast saying, well, when are we going to get crypto in, right? And different type of assets. And that's a different conversation. But what we're looking at too is realizing, how do we create annuities that are really specialized to the specific need of the retirement plan? So we're looking at how to think about really better budgeting of medical inflation. We're working on something right now that looks at medical inflation, and how can we put that as an allocation within an annuity to budget for someone's needs. That's something that is really a necessity as opposed to a shiny object. So what we're looking at is how to broaden, going back to what your comment was, Cheryl, how to get more access to the right type of product for the right distribution channel, because American retirees, we talked in our last meeting, that they might have all the access to the private banker. Mm-hmm. They might have to have access to the corner banker, to the agent down the street, to an RIA, all the above. And I know at Impact Marketing, you work and really have a lot of great outreach in specific cities and markets, and we want to serve them. So how do we get the right wrapper with our hand on our heart to that person to help at least one part of the retirement process so more Americans can be served? Not that they're putting all their money in this thing. That's not what I'm saying. But they can get more access, and access that's imperative to what their needs are in retirement.
Is long-term care the sort of the elephant in the room in terms of how retirement planning is going to evolve?
Well, medical inflation, I think, is definitely going to continue to be an issue of medical costs, right? And we hear that those issues right now, medical costs are a big political debate in Washington. What I would say is neither side have the right are agreeing, but both sides agree that we have an issue. If you hear it loud and clear, and how to tackle it and to the right group. So we're not going to get into that today, but how do you solve for that? And then how do you solve for people that are having medical care needs in their 90s, right? So is that bringing an element of long-term, lifetime income to help them figure that out? Then the other part is planning for financial legacy. And I'm not talking about trust fund babies here. We see the demographic right now of that we talked about in our last meeting, the first-time home buyers in their late 30s. There's a fear that AI, as much as AI is exciting, AI could maybe make entry-level jobs harder to get. How are you going to maybe help make sure your grandchildren funded? This is starting to be an issue that's losing the sleeping point of people. Isn't just the market now. It's making sure that they feel that their grandchildren are well taken care of. So I'm starting to hear this more of not a narrative, a cry for retirees that they're really trying to worry about the legacy of their family. even at a middle class level. So I think legacy planning as well is also an issue, but they also have to think of themselves first, not to be selfish, but that includes making sure that they have the means to take care of themselves as they live longer.
So on our first podcast, I mentioned Charles Dickens. On this one, you said Mark Twain. I would love to have you back on the podcast, and we'll see what famous author we reference the next time we do this, because you're doing such a great job and you're providing such great value. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and really answer my trivial questions about what the future of annuities and fixed index annuities are.
That's great. I wish I was just more well read. These are famous quotes. I love financial economics and some sports talk, but
I think you mentioned the Roman Empire as too, so you were certainly dotting the bingo card as you talk. So I think you did a fantastic job, and we thank you for taking the time to come down to Atlanta and talk to us. So thank you again, and thank you for watching. We'd love to have you guys locked into our YouTube channel. It's a great place for you to grow your practice. We've got all kinds of resources here. Of course, if you like and subscribe, that's the best way to stay on top of all the newest and best ideas that we have from both our marketing team, but also the other advisors that we work with here at Impact. So once again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.